The City and County of Bristol, 2015. It's the provincial capital of the southwest of England and European green capital city. In 1956, the year before I was born, a black and white film was made of this city in which my parents lived in the austere period following World War II. Here's what Alvar Lidell said about it then.
Today, it is a city of 500,000 people, the 5th port of England, the commercial and distributing centre for the West Country. To the casual eye, it's a huddle of roofs, a cluster of spires, a labyrinth of streets. But to the people of Bristol, who know and understand their city, these buildings and these streets, these roofs and these spires, all these tell a story, the story of how a city grew. One of the old city gates still stands, flanked by the chapel of St. John. But only a line of lanes marks the course of the former city walls. Street names recall the castle, but after 500 years of service, it was demolished by orders of Cromwell after the Civil War in 1655. The area became one of Bristol's main shopping centres, destroyed by bombing in 1940. And the fine stone bridge, lined in medieval times with merchants' houses, has given way to the wide and busy Bristol Bridge of today.
And what has happened since then? Those bomb sites that disfigured the cityscape? Well, office development has healed the scars. The Robinson Building, Bristol's first skyscraper. And then apartment developments on a site where beer was brewed for 2 centuries. A park replaces the Castle Street shops. But the wartime destruction isn't forgotten. As a stark reminder of the 1940 Blitz, St. Peter's Church ruin stands in solemn isolation. Close by is the ancient heart of Bristol.
But to the Bristolian, who stands where the High Cross once stood, this tiny patch of ground, a mere fraction of the centre of the modern town, is still the city. And if the visitor asks what it was that first gave this little town its prosperity, then let him look around. The very walls and streets speak their own history. It was the merchants trading Irish grain and Cotswold wool for French and Spanish wine who brought prosperity to Bristol. Their wealth endowed fine churches and abbeys. Here is Temple Church, once the home of the Knights Templar who fought in the Crusades. Yes, it really is a leaning tower. And this, the Cathedral Church of Bristol, was in those days a great Norman abbey. The Abbot's Gateway, built about 1170, still stands. And here is the lovely church of St. Mary Redcliffe, described by the first Queen Elizabeth as the fairest, the goodliest, and most famous parish church in England.
Well, the churches still adorn the city, but Bristol's prosperity now is broader based than it was in medieval times. So now, secular buildings compete with the ancient spires and steeples. Lloyd's headquarters takes pole position at Harbourside. Across from an 1830s tea warehouse, now one of Europe's leading centres for the contemporary arts. And a grain warehouse, a towering polychromatic wonder. It was a nightclub. Acker Bilk and Motorhead performed here. 100 feet high, 10 stories, but only 7 are visible, and no 2 are treated alike. Now it's apartments, with a fish restaurant enlivening its ground floor. It squares up to offices and flats across the water from Welsh Back, the embarkation wharf for historic voyages.
Bristol was among the ports which sent major voyages of trade and exploration into the new land, and the Society of Merchant Venturers was formed in the city, incorporating dolphins into its coat of arms. New buildings, gabled and half-timbered, sprang up. Haunts of sailors, merchants, and sea captains, and streets of gossiping Tudor houses outgrew the city's medieval walls. On the hills above, the prospering merchants built their mansions. Their wealth went not only into their beautiful homes, but into the founding of schools, hospitals, and almshouses, some of which still survive in their original setting. And so, as the 16th and 17th centuries slip by, the glory of Tudor and Jacobean England passes into the grace and elegance of Georgian England. Admire the sweep and unity of these Georgian terraces, the classically proportioned facades, the delicate tracery of balustrade and ironwork. This, too, was an elegance born of wealth and prosperity. In 10 ships which arrived at Bristol from the West India Islands, the 14th, 15th, and 17th instant, were imported 2,647 hogsheads of sugar, 195 puncheons of rum, 181 bags of ginger, 487 bales of cotton, 36 hogsheads of tobacco, 36 barrels of turpentine, 3 hogsheads of beeswax.
No bales, barrels or beeswax on the quays now. Ships no longer stop here to discharge cargo. They've forsaken commodities for livelier uses. A nightclub on an ex-sand dredger, a pub, a restaurant, and trendy eating in a former harbour police station. Hundreds of years of maritime trades here have been supplanted by residential development. Apartments rise from the water. New houses competes with Clifton's Victorian terraces, now sporting deck chair colours. The commercial traffic has gone, but the floating harbour is still busy with bustling ferries and sleek pleasure craft.
The Victorian age had come. Along the river, the new factories spread, fed by coal from Kingswood, Radstock, and South Wales. Round the factories, new suburbs of industrial houses grew. Many of Bristol's traditional glass and metal industries died out in competition with the north, but new ones took their place. And with them came a new type of man, the financier, the industrialist, the man of business. While the merchants were living in the past, these new men were looking to the future, and they were making their voices heard.
And new men are still drawn to Bristol with their dynamic new industries. Finance. Hargreaves Lansdown, the UK's biggest investment provider. £49 billion worth of assets are managed here. The largest selling brand of hot air balloons in the world. At Europe's biggest hot air balloon event, they take to the air and decorate the skyline as they levitate over their birthplace. Aardman. Using children's plasticine, they make cute animals talk. But they're a grown-up company, a multi-Oscar-winning world leader, in model animation. It takes a whole day to create brief snatches of footage on these mini sets. Just 2 seconds a day per animator. A highly sophisticated industrial process, but at a glacial pace and labour intensive. Here's Shaun the Sheep, their biggest global brand, famous in 170 countries. An exciting building with a beautiful freestanding laminated timber staircase and delightful nursery-like atmosphere. It bears the strong stamp of its occupier, friendly, humorous and informal, reflecting the creativity of Aardman Animations. And this imposing building is a habitat for the largest wildlife documentary production house in the world, the BBC Natural History Unit. So, we can see that Bristol benefits from a diverse range of employers nowadays, but in the 1800s, it was maritime matters that occupied the minds of the city fathers.
New docks, for example, were needed at the mouth of the Avon to handle the large new steamships which could no longer come up the river. For today, ships that Brunel longed to build bring cargoes from places Cabot never dreamed of to supply factories larger in area than the whole of Saxon Bristol. Cereals and feeding stocks, meals and oil cakes, maize, oats, wheat, oil nuts, oil seed, phosphates and fertilizers, mineral ore, zinc, aluminium, copper, petroleum, fuel oil, wood pulp, paper, timber, wine, fruit, oranges, lemons, grapefruit, sultanas, raisins, currants, grapes, bananas, butter, cheese, eggs, lard, bacon, ham, frozen meat, chilled meat, carcass meat, tinned meat, cocoa.
Now, oil storage tanks, distribution warehouses and waste disposal plants encircle Avonmouth Dock. Standing sentinel over the activity 413 feet below them are these wind turbines, generating 75% of the port's power and saving 15,000 tonnes of carbon emissions each year. A quarter of the UK's animal feedstuffs are imported here. Computerised systems can shift agricultural bulk products at 1,000 tonnes an hour. And here's a vivid contrast with mercantile shipping, a graceful cruise ship. Bristol is now an embarkation port for holidays to destinations both north and south, from Norway to Chile. 22 voyages each year sail from here. Then, south of the river mouth, Royal Portbury, a deep water dock created in the 70s. It has the largest entrance lock of any UK port. It needs it, with bulk cargo carriers coming in on the tide, laden with up to 100,000 tonnes of coal. A quarter of UK aviation fuel is discharged here, and pipelines pump it on eastward to London's airports and north to Birmingham. Stockyards here are linked to the Avonmouth railhead by a conveyor link that tunnels under the mouth of the River Avon. Enormous Triffid-like post-Panamax cranes, capable of handling ships too wide to negotiate the Panama Canal, loom over the quays. They can cope with vessels 17 containers wide. Car carriers with 1,000 vehicles on board. And it's two-way traffic. Pristine, polished rows of British-built cars for export. Offloading is done with surgical precision, and damage-free delivery is assured. Drivers wear white gloves, special overalls, and no jewellery. Each year, 500,000 cars are delivered or loaded through Royal Portbury. Between them, the two ports offer car compounds, 1 million square feet of warehousing, grain silos, and they handle 100,000 containers, over 1 million tonnes of agricultural bulk products, and 24 million bottles of wine.
Here, the West of England Academy of Art faces the Victoria Rooms, originally assembly rooms, and now the home of the University Union. And here stands the City Museum and Art Gallery, dwarfed now by the great tower of Bristol University. It was a solid, comfortable age, an age of stability and prosperity in which even the humblest shared. For even quite modest homes were now demanding those signs of Victorian respectability, a front garden and a bay window. Whole neighbourhoods of such houses were to grow up, and by the 1920s a new word had been coined for them, suburbia. Linked by bus and train, the old village greens of 50 years ago now become thriving suburban centres. Beyond them, the open countryside yields to the brick and concrete of new housing estates and garden suburbs. Down in the heart of the city, the old residential squares, which once heard the swish of crinolines, now echo to the tapping of typewriters. Or become diced across for new roads or thoroughfares, or succumb to contemporary palaces of steel and glass and concrete.
The university has now shed its Gothic revival style and gone for a lighter one. The Centre for Nanoscience and Quantum Information. Noise and vibration levels in the labs here are among the lowest achieved anywhere. It's been called the quietest building in the world. Alongside a £54 million new home for biological sciences. Here, research will span genomics, evolutionary biology, and environmental change. There's another campus to the north of the city now, the University of the West of England, UWE. In student numbers, it trumps the City University's 18,000 with 22,000 enrolled here. And the City Museum extends now into M Shed, a museum with one of the highest rates of repeat visits anywhere in the UK. Here's at Bristol, a leading science and discovery centre. This was a goods shed designed by a Great Western Railway engineer in 1904. Its planetarium has become an emblematic symbol of this interactive playground where documentary filmmakers can get themselves in the picture. Cut. Those suburbs have carried on growing. Patchway Common was agricultural land and playing fields, Now it's Bradley Stoke, a new town with 27,000 residents. So Bristol spreads north. Only the M4 and M5 now limit its growth at one of the country's largest motorway stack interchanges at Almondsbury. Bristol first developed at the confluence of rivers. Now it expands to where motorways meet, overseen by the strategically sited RAC Control Centre. Aztec West is close by, a business park with 7,000 employees. Shaun the Sheep and Wallace and Gromit are on the payroll. Of course, none of this development existed in 1956. There was a greater concentration of businesses in the city centre, including retail.
Shopping areas become defined. Park Street and Queen's Road become the Bond Street of Bristol. Whereas Broadmead is the home of the multiple stores and the mecca of the Saturday afternoon shopper. Between them, the city still remains the home of commerce, of law, banking and insurance. Outside the Corn Exchange are still preserved the bronze pillars known as nails, on which the merchants of old rang the worth of their coins, and gave rise to the expression, to pay on the nail. And here, seen through a Norman arch of 800 years ago, the new council house of 1956 spans the city's history and becomes the symbol of her prosperity.
Broadmead has spread eastwards with a £500 million covered shopping mall, Cabot Circus. Law and insurance companies cluster around Templemead Station to the south. Brunel would approve. After all, he had wanted his station close to the city centre anyway. To the north, that motorway confluence isn't spared by retailing. Now the devout Saturday and Sunday shoppers attend the Mall, sanctified by the co-divinity of St. Michael and John Lewis.
The council house is now City Hall. The city has its own working mayor, as well as a ceremonial Lord Mayor. In 1956, Bristol had no out-of-town shopping centres or science park. Its economy was based mainly on manufacturing.
Here, cocoa from the Gold Coast and sugar from the West Indies meet the milk and the cream of the dairy farms of Somerset in the manufacture of cocoa and chocolate. Cocoa from Bristol went with Scott to the South Pole. Cotton, paper, packing, wood pulp from Canada, china clay from Cornwall, rags from Lancashire and Yorkshire, esparto from Africa, dyes from the Midlands. Packings from Bristol went with Hillary to the summit of Everest.
Well, chocolate production has now moved from Somerdale in Keynsham to Poland. The packaging industry, Mardens, had grown up on the back of cigarette manufacturing. Well, now with increased health awareness, tobacco's been demonised. But prior to the discovery of its links with cancer, it had been viewed with pride as a major contributor to the city's economy.
Tobacco, cigar tobacco from Havana, Jamaica, Brazil, North Borneo, Indonesia. Oriental tobacco from Greece, Syria, Turkey. Flue-cured tobacco, air-cured tobacco, dark-fired tobacco from Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Nyasaland, Rhodesia, Canada, India. Tobacco for a nation's cigarettes.
The bonded warehouses where tobacco was stored are a familiar landmark, dramatically closing off the upstream end of the Avon Gorge. 30,000 casks of raw tobacco have been replaced by a variety of uses. Bristol Record Office, with 10 miles of shelves storing our city's archive, boxed, catalogued memories. Here, a charter of 1485 grants a reduction in Crown taxes to offset losses incurred when a hurricane wrecked vessels and flooded cellars in October 1484. It bears the seal of Richard III. He came to the aid of merchants following their autumn of discontent. And the venerable Little Red Book of Bristol describes the city's developing medieval maritime trade. The Create Environment Centre promotes green living, contrasting nicely with the building's smoky past. But one industry that still thrives today is aerospace.
Aircraft for a nation's supremacy in the air. Braemar, Beardmore, Brandon, Bloodhound. Berkeley, Bearhound, Beaver, Bagshot. Bulldog, Bombay, Blenheim. Beaufort, Beaufighter, Bisley. Buckingham, Brigham. Brabazon, Britannia. Now it is the air to be conquered. Once it was the sea. Before that, it was a river that had to be bridged. The story is the same throughout history. Only the scale changed.
In the 1950s, Filton and nearby Patchway were one of the epicentres of design and manufacturing for British civil and military aircraft. In fact, there's been evolution and production evolving here for well over 100 years. The British and Colonial Aeroplane Company, the Bristol Aeroplane Company, the Bristol Engine Company, Bristol Aero Engines, Bristol Siddeley, Rolls-Royce, the British Aircraft Corporation, British Aerospace, BAE Systems, and now GKN and Airbus. Wings for the whole Airbus family are designed here. They're also built here for the A400M military transport aircraft, which operates in military and humanitarian arenas all over the world. Teams of engineers and technologists work here on design, engineering, fuel systems and landing gear integration. But this assembly hall, the Brabazon hangar, now lies unused and unloved. Concorde was born here. English heritage have said that although it is steeped in history, it is otherwise unremarkable, so they haven't bothered to list it. But just consider this. It has room enough for 4 jumbo jets. When it was built, just after World War II, it had the largest window and doors anywhere in the world. And it was the second most voluminous building in existence. Just putting it together, stretched steel structure design beyond anything that had gone before. So what does the future hold for one of the world's great industrial buildings? It's uncertain. We do know that thousands of homes are planned for the runway. We do know that a museum celebrating 100 years of Bristol's innovation and enterprise in the aerospace industry will be housed in these listed First World War hangars. And alongside, a new building for Concorde will be dedicated to preserving and displaying
the grand old lady.
The story is the same throughout history, only the scale changes. From her nucleus at the bridge, Bristol has today grown far beyond her first horizon, sprawling across 70 square miles of England. A place in space, but equally a drama in time, the living heritage of the past. Victorian industrialist, Georgian merchant, Tudor adventurer, medieval trader, Norman conqueror, Saxon immigrant. From the past, Bristol has fashioned her present. On her present rest the foundations of the future.
So the 1956 film ends on a respectful, optimistic note. Since then, Bristol's moved away from an economy dominated by basic manufacturing to one driven by knowledge-intensive industries. Bristol reinvents itself over the centuries. It has the ability to use its natural resources and to innovate. The alternating scenes in this film are 59 years apart. So, in another 59 years, will Bristol still be a dynamic and thriving city? I say yes.
Could you clap your hands?
I'm still acting.
Yeah, that was
Still performing.
Yeah,
I've just started to do it.
Clap.
Yes.